God, thanks for this day. Pray that you'll bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I have a lot of things to cover. I know we're getting started a bit late here this morning. I would ask you to pray for me because trying to do graphics and keep up with all of this stuff and edit videos and review things that people send me and try to keep, it's really becoming almost impossible to keep up. So I know last week I said I was going to do a midweek update, and I did not do a midweek update, but you should understand I'll try to do a midweek update, but my definition of midweek is like between Sunday at 2 p.m. and Saturday at midnight. So that's midweek to me. So I worked a couple days this week and just trying to read and keep up. But I want to talk a little bit about a surveillance world today. Again, we look at these things from a light of how I think these things are going. This is a grid that I developed a number of years ago for my own personal, and maybe I got it from somebody, I don't even know, but I'll take credit for it. Unless you think it's really bad, then I got it from somebody else. But one of the things we talk about when a lot of us who speak at conferences and people who write books and that type of thing, we get together and they talk about everything's happening so fast and everything's happening all at once. And so as I kind of listened to this, I kind of came up with this thing that there'd be an acceleration of things happening. And I think we can all agree that we see that happening. The world is moving very quickly. Sometimes I look back and I think like, I must have talked about that 3 weeks ago. No, I haven't even talked about it yet. It was something that happened on Tuesday, and so much has happened since then. It seems like time is both compressing and expanding. And then there's a convergence. There's so many things that are happening all at once, particularly when they have these ridiculous globalist meetings like the UN General Assembly, like they did with the whole thing on the Sustainable Development Goals. What I try to be is kind of a generalist. Then I also came up with a thing called logistics. And so when we look at these different prophecies, particularly when you look at something like Ezekiel 38 and 39, which I think is a future thing that's going to happen. And the question is, when will it happen? How soon will it happen? When in relation to the return of the Lord does it happen? I'm more of the mind more and more that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is later in time. But then we also have all these prophecies in Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9, Daniel 11, Daniel 12. And when do all those things happen? And there's a lot of overlap, but I think everything's going to seem very compressed. But there's a logistics. So when you look at the prophecy like Ezekiel 38 and 39, it talks about all of these different countries who come in alliance against Israel. So what you would want to see, you want to see those alliances forming. You would want to see major military powers involved in that alliance. You would also want to see somebody contrary, opposing the alliance. You would also look at Daniel chapter 11, where it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, and they have a battle. They come against each other. How does that alignment take place? And what are the logistics? How do those things all come about to be ready to go at the same time? And I think we're seeing a lot of these things forming right now. But again, as we get closer, though, we'll have a little bit better understanding. And I don't think this is far off in the future. I think this is something that is starting to happen now, that as we're getting closer and closer to these things, we're going to have a little bit better understanding of timing and how they work out. Now, the difficult thing is how to balance the immediacy of how things seem to be happening, or that they will happen in the very near future, without getting into wild speculation. And that's a difficult thing to navigate. Now, what I see happening sometimes, and this comes a little bit from my experience as a trial lawyer, when you're a trial lawyer, you want to put your case together. The problem with and I see a lawyer sitting in the background, and I think he understands this. When you're a young lawyer and you're putting a case together, you have certain things you want to prove. So you start looking through the evidence, and what you see when you're a young trial lawyer is everything proves my case, when it doesn't prove your case. And if you try to go into court with some of that things and think that it proves your case, fortunately, there's usually a supervisor or a partner that will say, no, 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 you're out of your mind. If you think that proves your case, it actually does the opposite, and they will tell you you're out of your mind. Then the problem, though, becomes when you're the partner and you're supervising somebody putting the case together, you got to be careful not to get drawn back into that everything proves my case mentality. And you're going to find, but what I see sometimes in Bible prophecy is people have a particular view that this is how they think the overall thing works out, and then they interpret everything to prove their view, which I don't think is a good way about it. We have to look at, well, maybe this isn't quite what we think it is. So I think we need to be wise and humble at the same time and not get caught up in everything proves my case. And so that, but, you know, and I'm not trying to be too critical because I think that people are trying. So even though I can, as I've told you before, I get emails, I get books, I get handwritten papers, I get PowerPoints, I get all sorts of things from people all the time. One, I don't have time to review it in detail like I would like, but the one thing I've noticed is everybody's got a different opinion. And everybody's sure that their opinion as to how everything works out is correct. But I think as we get closer, we're going to say, okay, I probably got that one wrong. And so we joke around here that the 30 minutes of silence in Revelation, that's mentioned in Revelation, that's so everybody can update their charts and their views to get them to align with the facts on the ground, so to speak. So this is a difficult time. Now, I want to talk a little bit today. I titled this A Surveillance World. I cannot even begin to tell you everything that's going on that concerns me, particularly with the development of artificial intelligence. And then you have these globalist leaders, a cabal of leaders, a cabal of people that want to control everything, and they want to change everything. It's, and I could stand here literally for hours and hours and hours and present things to you. There's a couple good books out there right now that I would recommend. Patrick Wood's The Evil Twins of Technology, or of Transhumanism and Technocracy. Excellent work developing the history of this. By the way, Patrick, as you know, had a stroke a couple months ago. He's doing well. I texted him this week. He's got a little weakness in his left ankle. The doctors didn't expect him to make it or to recover. And he's still going through some speech therapy, but he thinks he should be able to, he hopes to be ready to do some interviews again in about a month. And so each day he says, I feel like a walking miracle. So pray for him. I think he's a very important voice. There's also a guy, I know Patrick knows, I don't know him. As you know, Patrick Wood was here a few years ago and spoke. I don't know how many years ago that was, 4 or 5 years ago? It seems like it was just, was it longer than that? Well, anyway, he was here for a weekend and spoke, and I've known Patrick for a long time, but continue to pray for him. And then there's a guy, you can find him at, Joe Allen is his name. I believe Joe was raised Southern Baptist, and I don't know his eschatological views or anything like that, but he's been looking at artificial intelligence and transhumanism and that sort of thing for a long time, and he has a new book out. I've not had a chance to read much of it. It's called Dark Aeon, A-E-O-N. I think that's how it's spelled. And there's always a big controversy. Is it Dark Aeon or Dark Aeon? And he always says, well, it's not Aesop's Fables. It's Aesop's Fables, and it's spelled sort of the same way. So that's how, which is kind of a logical way to approach it. And he has a website. He's on a number of different platforms under the moniker JoeBot, Joebot XYZ. And he also has a Substack, JoeBotXYZ.substack. And he also is associated with warroom.org and is on there fairly regularly. So he is a good source to follow. And in his book, he has sort of collected the whole history of the development of this artificial intelligence. And I would highly recommend that you get it and read it, especially since I haven't had time. I try to piece together bits and pieces of it to present here, but he's a tremendous source. But one of the things that, I have a master's degree in criminology and correctional administration, which is the worthwhile part of that was it motivated me to go to law school, because I did work in the federal prison system for a time when I was in graduate school, and I did not particularly care for it. Somebody would say you didn't like incarcerated criminals, so you went to law school, so you worked to the ones that hadn't been in prison yet. And that's, I guess there's some truth to that humor there. But this is the thing, this is a prison design, and you can look it up. It's called the Panopticon, P-A-N Opticon. This was, and so I've sort of updated it to include Facebook, Amazon, Google, and some of the tech giants as to how they do it. But the design of the system was that they would have a cell block in a circle, and in the middle of the circle would be a tower. And what it gave them the ability was to look into every cell 24/7. Now, they couldn't look into every cell all 24/7, but the people that were in the cells didn't know that. So it gave the impression that you were under 24/7 surveillance, even though you were not. Now, the problem with this is that we live in a world now where we are under 24/7 surveillance. People are collecting our data all the time. I had rotator cuff surgery a few years ago. My shoulder was bothering me. And now my Facebook and Twitter feeds are full of, some kind of brace to wear for your shoulder and shoulder surgery and how the muscles in the shoulder work. I must have had 30 or 40 things on my Facebook feed yesterday because I was complaining about my shoulder bothering me to Pam and at work. And so, of course, my phone's in my pocket, and it's listening to you. I mean, it's just, we're under surveillance all the time. So here is this Panopticon, and this is a good picture of the world that we live in now. The surveillance world that we live in. So let me move on here to some things that I want to talk about. So I'll get to that in just a moment. Now, I've talked a lot about demographics, and we live in a world where the demographics of the world are changing very rapidly. We've had essentially unrestricted abortion in the United States for most of the last 50 years. Now, everybody was excited that last year the Supreme Court, or was it this year? I guess it was this year, the Supreme Court, or was it last year? Recently, the Supreme Court overturned two important decisions that gave the right to abortion unrestricted status in the United States. That would have been Roe versus Wade in 1973, and then a later case called Casey, the governor of Pennsylvania at the time, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, or Planned Parenthood versus Casey. I can't remember who sued who in that case. But those cases allowed what essentially amounted to unrestricted abortion. And so for a long time, the conservatives in the United States, the pro-life conservatives, wanted to get a change in the Supreme Court, get a majority on the Supreme Court, and then a case to the Supreme Court. And these things can take years and years and years, and it took 50 years. And finally, the case came to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade and Casey, which meant that it did not outlaw abortion, though. That was the problem. It only returned the abortion question to the states, and the states could decide. And what has happened in elections since then is that the right to an abortion and the right to even late-term abortions up till the time of birth abortions has become pretty ingrained in our culture. So now the difficult work is, now the work is getting messy for the pro-life movement. And the successes have been there have been some successes. Ohio has done things. There have been these heartbeat bills that have been enacted in a lot of places. But now it looks like it's a losing issue politically. Some states like Kansas, which is pretty conservative, have voted with a fairly large majority against things that are what you would consider to be pro-life. I know here in Ohio we have an issue coming up. In the last election, we were told, vote yes on issue 1, vote yes on issue 1. That was just in, was it August? Last month? Well, now it's almost 2 months ago. So anyway, early August, we had an election, and we're going to vote no or vote yes on issue 1. And the reason we're going to vote yes on issue 1 because it was going to require a 60% majority vote to change the state constitution. Before that, it had just been one more than 50%, and you would be able to change the Constitution. And the reason that the Republicans pushed this through was because they suspected that pro-abortion groups were going to be pushing to undo abortion restrictions that have been enacted by the Ohio legislature. So that came to the voters, and I think it lost 60% to 40%. It was the voting no on issue 1 won what they wanted to do, which was keep the smaller majority, the bare majority, to change the state constitution. Now behind that, so here that just was voted on in early August, and now here we come in November, there's going to be another issue 1 on the ballot, and now if you support the right to life and you're against abortion, then you should vote no on the next issue 1. And so it's a little bit confusing. And so we'll see how this goes. And you see people, they're sticking their finger to the wind. And let's be honest, President Trump has done this. In some of the interviews that he's done, he's been very critical of these abortion heartbeat bills that were enacted. He doesn't like them. And so he's losing a lot of support among people in the pro-life community. He's a politician, and he's making the decision that this is a losing issue, and that if you do this, they're going to come after you with everything that they got. And if you're for, severe restrictions on abortion, like heartbeat bills, as soon as you hear a heartbeat, which is 6 weeks after conception, you can't have an abortion. He's trying. I think I'm trying to think. I want to say I'm trying to think like he's thinking, but he is thinking that, look, we need to have. We want to win, and we're not going to win if we're hardcore on the issue of abortion. That's just, he's a politician, and that's the political calculus that he's made. And I would say that you're probably going to find almost all of the Republican politicians are going to make that particular calculus, because they view it as a losing issue, because we've had 50 years of indoctrination in our country against this. And so I'm not saying that I agree with the view that it's not an important issue. I think it's an incredibly important issue, particularly when you get into this area of demographics. So here how many babies aborted in the United States in the last 50 years? 75 million, probably, 1.5 million a year. By the way, in the years since Roe versus Wade got overturned, they've had more abortions than they did in the year before Roe got overturned. That was reported in the New York Times, and that's accurate. And that's troubling. And because the pro-abortion crowd has been very, very aggressive in the way they've done that, they have a lot of money behind them. They are now pushing for easy access to the morning after pill. And you can get that by mail order. But this has an impact worldwide. It's having a tremendous impact on demographics. So the world's population may peak in your lifetime, and what happens next is the question. And so they look at everything from 1000 BC, when the world population was estimated to be 110 million people. So when you get to the time of Christ, Rome was a city of about 1 million people, but it dominated the world. And it's interesting, I think that today, a really committed city of about 1 million people could dominate the world, even though some of the cities of the world, like Tokyo, probably have populations in excess of, 30 million people now? Have you ever seen a like a near, not a satellite picture, but closer than a satellite picture of Tokyo. It's unbelievable, the density of the population there. And there's many cities like this. With the growth of demographics, by the way, and this is kind of hard to grasp, is that some places the population is declining and will decline very, very rapidly, but other places, at least right now, have high birth rates like Africa. So I was reading an article a number of years ago. They estimate, and this is where I always get in trouble, by 2100. Now, oh, you think we'll be right? No, I'm just saying is if you plot things out to 2100, you can make some predictions as to how the world might look. And those articles say that the population of about 4 or 5 cities in Africa will be close to 100 million people each. And Africa will explode because their birth rate is still very high. Europe, Russia, Ukraine, China, Japan, and now the United States, and a lot of the West, we're in a decline. So they're looking at the world population now is about 8 billion people. So that's so it took all that time, but look at how it's grown just in the last 100 years. It's gone up about 4 times. Now they think that it might go up to, I forget, this is 2085, 10 billion people. I don't think it's going to get there. First of all, I don't think we're going to be around, but we're already seeing massive decline in a number of countries. In China, they're at the point where within a generation, they could be roughly half the size they are now. 1.4 billion to 700 million. And they have an excess of males in their culture that will soon approach 100 million males because of sex selection abortion, favoring male babies. They'll have 100 million males in China of marriageable age that won't be able to find a spouse, a female. Well, what does that mean to the world in terms of war and that type of thing? Well, I think it first of all, if China wants to preserve its legacy, it's going to do something before they decline, and they have a lot of extra men to do it. They have cannon fodder. And they can just throw human waves at things. And human waves are even with high technology, unless you have unlimited ammunition, it's hard to defeat human waves. So I don't think the population will get up to 10 billion. So there's this massive decline that's going, but then look at what they expect to happen in the population. It's going to go down as fast as it went up once it reaches its peak. And it's a little bit hard for us to grasp this. I mean, a lot of us, I'm a baby boomer. I grew up in that era, the post-World War II era, when they were building schools all over the place. There are places now where they're closing them down. China is terrible. I mean, I was listening to some demographic report on China just recently. Everybody because you can't put your money just anywhere in China, where one place where they let people invest it was in real estate or homes. So people have bought extra homes. So now they have in China, they have not like 1 home per family on average, they have 2 homes per family on average. But there's nobody to live there. And they've been investing, that's why things like Evergrande and real estate is having trouble in China, because they're just pouring money into it, and they're blowing up cities that they built to accommodate people that would accommodate 2 or 3 million people. They're just tearing them down. Well, that's not a very good investment. If you were part of the people that invested in that, that's where people have their life savings. So it's going to be a pretty difficult decline. So, and what does it mean to the world? And when you kind of layer Bible prophecy on it, I think it makes people more likely to do things. Like China wants to preserve its legacy. Xi is an absolute dictator in China. He's gotten rid of almost everybody who would oppose him, which is a problem because not only does he try to control everything, which in a country that size it's hard to do, but then people don't give him information that he should have because they're afraid, well, if he doesn't like me, I'm going to get arrested and killed. Remember how he had that one guy who was a former head of the Chinese Communist Party, drug out of a giant meeting last year. That was done for show. You oppose me, because that guy it was anticipated that he was going to get up and he was going to be critical of Xi at that meeting. And nobody knows whatever happened to that guy. I don't think he's been seen since. The head of Evergrande, the big real estate company, was arrested this week because you don't get tolerated. Remember when the big popular billionaire from, well, he had a lot of popularity, a lot of notoriety, Jack Ma from Alibaba? What happened to him? He used to be all over the place. Well, he's still around, he's still wealthy, but he got too big for his, little britches, I guess. And Xi knocked him down, and that's what happens. So you can see here, you can see China and India, the big clusters here in the lower left-hand corner. But then here, as living standards increase, birth rates fall or fell. And you can see the decline in birth rates in all of these countries all over the world that happened. And look how fast the birth rates fell. Well, part of it was abortion. Part of it was fertility. Part of it was when societies become more successful, people have less babies. And so I've talked about it a lot, and the question is, what does it mean when, in terms of how these things are going to work out in Bible prophecy? And the answer is, I don't know the answer. All I can say is, I think it's significant. I think it makes it more likely that people are going to react. By the way, one of the countries who had a decline in fertility rates was Iran. Last year, I think I showed you the piece out of the Tehran Times, which is an Iranian government mouthpiece newspaper, that said Iran had just experienced in the past year the most rapid decline in the fertility rate for females of any country in human history. Now, why would they report that about themselves? Because they're trying to turn it around. The government doesn't think that's a good thing. And so there are all these people like, oh, well, don't talk about peak China and we're on the decline in China. They'll turn it around. They won't turn it around. What you're seeing happen on these demographic things, this is the New York Times reporting on it. Okay, so they're not inclined to do some things like this, but what we're seeing is really, absent a massive plague or something, this is unprecedented in human history. And you can see the decline on this chart as to what it's going to go. And it's very difficult. It's hard to wrap our heads around this. So what it means prophetically, I don't know. But so let's look at some of the things that are going on. This is a recent meeting. I think this was an Arab meeting. I think those are all Arab countries or Islamic countries. But what do you see in that picture? You see that stupid circle of multicolors that represents the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. There are 17. By the way, the Palestinians proposed an 18th one back in 2018, which says essentially get rid of Israel, get Israel off our backs. Here's one that was just recently. We're at halftime and we're way off track. So we have 7 years to get to our goals. Only 15% are on track. Nonprofit leaders are using the power of AI, though, to create bold solutions. And there's that stupid wheel you're going to see.
30% of some Indian farmers' crops are destroyed by pests. With AI, they can get the advice they need to save them in a few seconds.
Now with AI, we can actually pinpoint which women out of the thousands to pick up so that our health workers can reach out to them and help them access the service better.
Pollution levels in Kampala are very high, and computer science has a role to play to create solutions.
Tracking biodiversity is crucial to support restoration. It used to take months to identify a single species. It now takes just seconds.
Using AI, we can integrate census data, poverty data, and disaster data so we can target the areas with the highest need.
We scan millions of pages every year. AI makes it all accessible, so human rights defenders can quickly find the information they need.
So you see the imagery that they're using. This is UN, it's global. So they just had this big meeting in New York where a big part of it was the Sustainable Development Goals, in addition to allowing everybody to come and all the political leaders of the world and non-political leaders come and give their little speeches about what's going on. Now, what you're going to see soon here is you're going to see a lot over the next month, and I hope to cover this somewhat. There's a big meeting in the United Arab Emirates, which is now part of the Abraham Accords, called COP28. Now, don't think that COP28 means year 2028. It's the 28th meeting. So COP27, they had that at down in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. Remember, I played you some clips of them. They had the 10 commandments of climate change, or fixing climate or stopping, what's going to destroy the climate and the environment. They had the 10 commandments, and they were on clay tablets, and they took them up, a group of them, religious nuts, they took them up to what they thought was Mount Sinai there in Egypt, and they broke the tablets, sort of mimicking what had happened in the book of Exodus when Moses came down from the mountain. But so here is this guy named Jabbar. And everything's going to be centered around climate change and health. This is the big impact, and they're bringing in through the World Health Organization. They're bringing in some pretty restrictive things in treaties. Some of that's going to be implemented very soon, and it's going to give a lot of power to the World Health Organization. And it's not really a treaty. In the United States, we have to have our Senate approve treaties. It would never get approved. Just like the JCPOA agreement that the Obama administration entered into with Iran, that should have been a treaty, but he just said, well, it's an executive agreement, so I don't have to do it. And so Obama would say something, he would say things like, well, I don't need to get the Senate's approval. I have a desk, an office, executive power, and a pen and paper, and I can pretty much do whatever I want. Which sort of doesn't sound very much like he's pro-democratic. By the way, there was a speech this week, the other day. I will not play it. It was Joe Biden speaking. I am telling you, and he was criticizing people, MAGA, who opposes him. And I can tell you that speech was as full of lies as any speech I've ever heard any politician anywhere in the world give, accusing the people who oppose him of being anti-democratic, of not respecting the rule of law when they're out there filing all of these ridiculous lawsuits against Trump. So I don't know if you saw the report this week in New York. A judge ruled that the Trump organization had committed fraud. They had overvalued properties and led banks to make loans to them. Therefore, they're going to essentially put all of his properties in New York in receivership. Trump Tower and everything. Even though he got loans from banks who have teams of analysts to look at the value of properties that are represented on their loan documents. And believe me, banks review that type of stuff. Sometimes fraud is committed, but he's paid all these loans back, is my understanding. And but look, he's filed bankruptcy. A number of his companies have filed bankruptcy, some of his companies. And that's permitted. If you don't like that, change the law. If you don't like somebody taking a tax deduction for something, change the law. But now they're making it up as they go along, and this judge's ruling is just absolutely moronic, what happened. And they're never going to let him alone. But the problem is, he's the target now. So if he drops out of the race tomorrow, do you think they're all just going to pack up their bags and go away? No. Please don't be that naive. So this is a thing, and the other thing that I find interesting in these Arab cultures, so you have the Saudi Crown Prince is promoting this thing called Neom, the line, this 100-mile long city that's in a line 1,500 feet high. He's promoting this big building in Riyadh, the Mukaba, or Muraba, I think it's Mukaba. And it's just this big cube, but in the middle of it, it's got this spiral thing, which is based on what a lot of artists have represented as the way the Tower of Babel looked. And then this is the circular thing is the Museum of the Future in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. So that's where they're going to have these countdowns to the Climate 28 thing. The other thing that's happening is that the UN and globalists and all these different organizations are setting up these control organizations. So here is this one, our Common Agenda Policy Brief 8, Information Integrity on Digital Platforms. So they're concerned that they're not controlling everything on the message, that there are people out there presenting alternative views, which instead of calling them alternative views, we would call them facts, because they have this agenda that they're trying to shove down everybody's throat, and it's based on control. And again, what do you see down here in the bottom? You see that Sustainable Development Goals wheel. And so here's the introductory thing, talking about digital platforms and that type of thing. And it says here, it has become clear that business as usual is not an option. We've got to control disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. Remember we had that lady, Nina Jankowicz, commonly referred to as Scary Poppins, who was doing those show. She was actually pretty talented on the show tunes thing, but she was wacko. But here, this is like from the United Nations, and you see the wheel there again. We are people and planet. We are people and planet. We're going to the future. So this big common agenda brief that they have, in practice, the distinction between mis and disinformation can be subtle and difficult to determine. What is information integrity? And so they come up, I mean, this is like a 50, 80-page brief that they have to advise government people about how to control everything in terms of information. Then they look at things, and again, you see this, here's the Sustainable Development Goal. They're everywhere, and you're going to see them, particularly as they announced at the Sustainable Development Goal thing. We have 7 years left to get this done. We're 2023. We want them done by 2030. We've got to push this, and you're going to see this global push to do this. By the way, there's what all of this stuff is sort of foreshadowing is this end time tower, sort of like the Tower of Babel was the thing at the beginning. It'll be the thing at the end. And remember, though, the Lord intervened and destroyed the Tower of Babel before they finished it. So you see a lot of plans about how they're going to build this, build that, build this, build that. And I think with the mindset behind it is the same mindset at the Tower of Babel. And I think the Lord, I pray the Lord will intervene before they do this. But one of the things that they looked at was, how long did it take to get to 100 million users? So this is an example of acceleration, that these things happen much more quickly. So Instagram took it 30 months to get to 100 million users. TikTok took 9 months, and then ChatGPT, which was rolled out in late November, took 2 months. So I was in Israel 10 days after they rolled out ChatGPT. Everybody was talking about it. And at that time, it had like 1 million users. And within another 6 weeks, it had 100 million. Now, ChatGPT is very basic artificial intelligence information. There is stuff that's doing way more on artificial intelligence. I don't know what the plans are. All I know is Amazon is building buildings out in New Albany. They already have a bunch all over town. You can see them on a map. They have a bunch out near Dublin, around 161 between Dublin and Plain City. They have them along Interstate 270 on the west side. They have them in New Albany, and they're building 5 more buildings, and they're going to spend $3.5 billion to build those. That's a lot of construction cost. In a world where it seems like population is declining or leveling off, commercial real estate is having some problems, but they've got big plants, and they're developing new chips. I've talked about NVIDIA, their chip. New one they have, it's about the size of an iPad. They're selling them, mainly the biggest customers, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Process that a little bit. And their website says that each of these chips has at least 200 billion transistors in them. They're talking about applied materials technology, developing in a number of places, and they're going to do this. Here's another one. So they track things like, the word pound climate scam, how many times that appeared on Twitter. They're tracking these things. They have government, non-government organizations, NGOs, that are doing these tracking things, and then they're giving the information to the government so the government can control what people are saying and seeing on these various social media platforms. Here's another one. This is from the Daily Mail. And it's interesting. I usually get this stuff from the UK papers. You don't see it really talked about that much in the United States newspapers, even though it's happening in the United States. So check out Daily Mail. It's I'd call it center-left, more to left-leaning organization, but I read that. I read the Times, the Guardian, the Times of London, Financial Times, because it seems like you get a little bit more information there than you do in the pages of the New York Times, which I also read. In the New York Times, they have an opinion page. It's just not, they think it's only limited to a few pages in the paper. It's actually limited to the whole paper pretty much is opinion with a few facts shown in. You got to find them. But look at this. CIA is set to roll out its own version of ChatGPT to try and comb the internet for useful clues and potential security threats. And who do you think they're viewing as potential problems? You people, us, me. And it's concerning. And look at this one bullet point. Well, an AI program developed by the CIA will be rolled out across the U.S. government's 18 intelligence agencies. And I'm not sure why they call them intelligence agencies, because that seems to be a little bit of a misnamed or misnomer. The push comes as experts fear China has taken on a command over the technology on the global stage. And despite fears that AI is not fully understood, the CIA's AI boss, say that 5 times real fast, CIA's AI boss, Randy Nixon, said it could grow with no limitations other than how much things cost. And this is a concern. I mean, it's growing very, very quickly. The CIA's open source enterprise division developed the tech which is rolling out. Randy Nixon said this: we've gone from newspapers and radios to newspapers and television, to newspapers and cable television, to basic internet, to big data, and it just keeps going. Nixon noted that analyzing the level of data across the web is a significant challenge that the AI program would help handle, adding, we have to find the needles in the needle field. The push to add artificial intelligence to the U.S. military and intelligence apparatus comes amid mounting pressure to compete with China's advancing potency on the world stage. And you're going to see this a lot. And the AI thing is very concerning. Go back last week, I played some clips of a discussion that Elon Musk, Max Tegmark, and Brockman and Benjamin Netanyahu had in San Francisco or Silicon Valley on the 18th, 2 weeks ago. Tomorrow will be 2 weeks since they had that discussion. Go find it on the internet. It's about 53 minutes long. You should listen to it. Remember, that's the one where Elon Musk said, well, where do you think this is going? Well, I think that AI is really creating heaven. You won't have to work. You'll have a universal basic income. Oh, well, you'll have a high universal basic income. And, we don't like to work anyway. And He referred to himself as the unofficial president of the United States because the tech companies have a lot of power. Netanyahu goes, well, when are you going to die? To which everybody on the panel responded, at least Brockman and Musk. Brockman is with OpenAI, the biggest AI company right now. And they said, well, that'll be something you choose. And Ray Kurzweil thinks everything's going to merge in 2030 at the singularity where man and machine merge. Maybe that's optimistic. They used to say it was 2045. And I thought last year they're going to hit that 2030 target. And now they're all talking about it. And it's happening much more quickly than we think. But the one thing that's not happening is, what was her name? She was at the World Government Summit in 2022. Pippa Malmgren, she said, well, it's going to be like blockchain and digital currency and social credit systems are coming, but we need an AI Bill of Rights for everybody. Anybody seen that yet? Has anybody got a copy of the AI Bill of Rights that all these people that want to do all this have released? I haven't seen it. I try to look for it. There's discussions about it, but most of it comes about how to control you. So this is an interesting thing. This was on, I think I found this on Israel I-24 News. This is, I'm going to turn this down so you won't understand it anyway. This is a newsreader that China developed. It's not a person. It was all done by AI. So this person gets on and delivers the news. Well, now somebody's making a determination as to what news is delivered. And the development of AI is, it's concerning. So here was a debate that The Economist magazine had. And again, this is the magazine that always produces these things like The World in 2023. And they actually do a pretty good job on their prediction. Back in 2019, The World in 2019, they had the 4 horsemen. And everything was backwards because you had to see in a mirror. That's kind of an occult thing. So here is an AI news person. Never sneezes, never coughs. It's perfect. So here was a debate that The Economist had between an AI guy, and I can't remember his name, but he's pro-AI, and Yuval Harari. And this is what was said.
2028. What does the world look like? How will I interact with AIs? What will we all be doing and not doing?
Well, let's just look back over the last 10 years to get a sense of the trajectory that we're on and the incredible momentum that I think everybody can now see with the generative AI revolution. Over the last 10 years, we've become very, very good at classifying information. We can understand it, we sort it, label it, organize it. And that classification has been critical to enabling this next wave because we can now read the content of images, we can understand text pretty well, we can classify audio and transcribe it into text. The machines can now have a pretty good sense of the conceptual representations in those ideas. The next phase of that is what we're seeing now with the generative AI revolution. We can now produce new images, new videos, new audio, and of course, new language. And in the last year or so, with the rise of ChatGPT and other AI models, it's pretty incredible to see how plausible and accurate and very finesse to these new language models are. In the next 5 years, the frontier model companies, those of us at the very cutting edge who are training the very largest AI models, are going to train models that are over 1,000 times larger than what you currently see today in GPT-4. And with each new order of magnitude in compute, that is 10x more compute used, we tend to see really new capabilities emerge. And we predict that the new capabilities that will come this time over the next 5 years will be the ability to plan over multiple time horizons. Instead of just generate new text in a one shot, the model will be able to generate a sequence of actions over time. And I think that that's really the character of AI that we'll see in the next 5 years. Artificial capable AIs. AIs that can't just say things, they can also do things.
But what does that actually mean in practice? Just use your imagination. Tell me what my life will be like in 2028. How will I interact with them? What will I do? What will be different?
So I've actually proposed a modern Turing test, which tries to evaluate for exactly this point. Right? The last Turing test simply evaluated for what a machine could say, assuming that what it could say represented its intelligence. Now that we're kind of approaching that moment where these AI models are pretty good, arguably they've passed the Turing test, or maybe they will in the next few years. The real question is, how can we measure what they can do? So I've proposed a test which involves them going off and taking a $100,000 investment, and over the course of 3 months, trying to set about creating a new product, researching the market, seeing what consumers might like, generating some new images, some blueprints of how to manufacture that product, contacting a manufacturer, getting it made, negotiating the price, drop shipping it, and then ultimately collecting the revenue. And I think that over a 5-year period, it's quite likely that we will have an ACI, an artificial capable intelligence, that can do the majority of that task autonomously. It won't be able to do the whole thing. There are many tricky steps along the way, but significant portions of that. It will be able to make phone calls to other humans to negotiate. It will be able to call other AIs in order to establish the right sequence in a supply chain, for example. And of course, it will learn to use APIs, application programming interfaces, so other websites or other knowledge bases or other information stores. And so, you know, the world is your oyster. You can imagine that being applied to many, many different parts of our economy.
So Yuval, a man who doesn't use a smartphone very much, you listen to this. Does this fill you with horror, and do you agree with it? Do you think that's the kind of thing that is likely to happen in the next 5 years?
I would take it very seriously. I don't know. I'm not coming from within the industry, so I cannot comment on how likely it is to happen. But when I hear this as a historian, for me, what we just heard, this is the end of human history. Not the end of history, the end of human-dominated history. History will continue with somebody else in control. Because what we just heard is basically Mustafa telling us that in 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new ideas independently. This is the first time in history we confronted something like this. Every previous technology in history, from a stone knife to nuclear bombs, it could not make decisions. Like the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima was not made by the atom bomb. It was made by President Truman. And similarly, it can, every previous technology in history, it could only replicate our ideas. Like radio or the printing press, it could make copies and disseminate the music or the poems or the novels that some human wrote. Now we have a technology that can create completely new ideas. And it can do it at a scale far beyond what humans are capable of.
So it can create new ideas, and in important areas within 5 years we'll be able to enact them. And that is a profound shift. Before we go on to the many ways in which this could be the end of human history, as you put it, and the potential downsides and risks of this, can we just for a second, just indulge me, I'm an optimist at heart, can we talk about the possibilities? What are the potential upsides of this? Because there are many, and they are really substantial. And I think you wrote that there is the potential that this technology can help us deal with incredibly difficult problems and create tremendously positive outcomes. So can we just briefly start with that before we go down the road of the terrible things?
When I say the end of human history, again, I'm not talking necessarily about the destruction of humankind or anything like that. There are many positive potential. It's just that control, power, is shifting away from human beings to an alien intelligence, to a non-human intelligence.
We'll also get to that because there's a question of how much power, but let's stick with...
So it's interesting. So when that discussion with Musk and Netanyahu and Brockman and Max Tegmark in Silicon Valley less than 2 weeks ago now, you know, the Netanyahu asked when you said heaven, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, Netanyahu says, well, when are you going to die? And all the guys in the panel, at least Brockman and Musk said, well, you know, you'll choose that. This is not, these are issues that I don't know that we in the church as pastors and elders and whatever, we're really thinking about the impact is that how do we minister to people in a world like that? Are we going to live in a world like that? Will the Lord return? I hope the Lord returns because it seems very dystopian. Tegmark, then the Netanyahu threw out the question like, well, what are going to happen to the human workers in that kind of economy? And the Brockman, he said from OpenAI, he says, well, it'd be great because you'll have, remember you had a favorite teacher? Well, now you have like a favorite teacher on every subject you could ever want. You'll be able to carry your teacher around in your pocket and always consult with it. And Tegmark goes, I don't think the question is what will happen to the human workers. The question will be, will there be humans when this goes forward? And that's a legitimate question. So I give him credit for that. So I mentioned this. So talk about the economy just briefly. Evergrande's under major investigation in China. Here's an article from the Times yesterday. Facebook, Meta, ended a office lease in London before they even occupied the building. I was reading an article that commercial real estate is having major problems in Atlanta, and you think Atlanta's a dynamic, growing city and that type of thing, but there are office buildings that are 25% empty. I was talking to somebody for a big bank here locally. I ran into him at Costco, where we're buying our massive quantities of stuff we'll never get around to eating before it goes bad. But we got it at a good price. That's the theory. But he said that the bank he works for, they're requiring people to come back to the office, and they're measuring the swipes when you get into the elevator at the office. Well, that's because they have a huge investment in a building downtown. I think Bank One I don't know if Bank One's doing the same thing at that massive building they have up there around Polaris, which I think I understand is bigger than the Pentagon in size, square footage. It's Chase. What did I say? Oh, well, it used to be Bank One. I remember when it was Bank One. Yeah, now it's JP Morgan Chase. But like in Atlanta, buildings, just like in San Francisco and other cities, Baltimore, same thing. I mean, you're finding buildings that are 25, 30, 40 stories that are close to being unoccupied. People are pulling out. People are working from home. People like working from home. And people don't like going downtown, especially when you see things like, did you see that fiasco in Philadelphia the other day where they attacked an Apple store? And then the cops come, and the people are trying to arrest are just beating up on the cop. It's really pretty scary. Here in the UK, not here, but there in the UK, they're trying to put in a 20-mile-per-hour speed limits for half of the British population in most of these little towns. And somebody said, this is an editorial from the Times, a default 20-mile-per-hour speed limit in residential areas in Wales is unnecessary and oppressive. Well, that's an understatement. Here's another one. Europeans love green policies until the bill comes due. And they're paying the bill right now. Energy costs are through the roof. People can't afford the cost of utilities in a lot of places. They're trying to, how do you stay warm when you can't afford the heat? These sites are popping up. Here's another one. This is kind of wildfires cut cleaner air gains. So a wildfire can just wipe out everything that man thinks that they're doing. But here's a guy who has an answer. He went to France recently, and I always like the imagery of these. This is King Charles, former prince, talking about his favorite thing, climate change, in the French Assembly. Kind of scary. The U.S., we just approved the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the military is this woke guy. He is woke with capital W-O-K-E and then like a squared or cube thing in the upper right-hand corner. This is going on in the UK. GMC deletes women from forums. This is in like a gynecology practice, a female-oriented practice, maternity, that sort of thing, and treating menopause. It's interesting, they call it menopause, but I don't know men that go through menopause. It's usually women, right? I don't know. Anyway, but they've taken away this. And so now the message that's being sent to girls all over the place is, if you want to be a really good girl, be a boy first, and then transition. You know, you want to win a competition, be a boy that transitioned to a female. That's the best women that we have. It's madness. It's total madness. And then California, even though the governor vetoed a bill recently, Governor Gavin Gelhead Newsom, he said he vetoed that AB 957 that was pretty oppressive in terms of parental rights. But Chino Valley, big dispute there. And when Newsom vetoed the bill, he says, well, look, we don't need this bill because we have plenty of other stuff in place to do what we want to do anyway, which was probably true. This is an editorial in the New York Times last week. Why have conservatives gone after trans rights like this? I mean, do you really need the answer? Do you really have to ask that question? Because it's insane. Go look up and read what a transition surgery from female to male has to do to a body. It's unbelievable. I mean, don't be eating or having eaten recently. It'll make you sick to your stomach. Go read what puberty blockers do to a female body or a male body when they're trying to go through puberty. And they act like, oh, this, you know, we just stop it and reverse it when we want. You can't. You're ruining these kids. And the whole scientific establishment seems to be in favor of it. And so this person, a professor of English at Barnard College and a vice president of PEN America, I don't know what that is, but she's like, well, why are conservatives doing this? Maybe we care about people. You can't even consider that. It's just and then this is from the National Post in Canada just yesterday. Trans surgery on teens under 18 is rising. And what have conservatives been saying? It's happening more and more often. And what did the people that were doing it say? Well, it's a one-off. It rarely happens. So then what did they do? Well, they got caught, so they went out and changed their websites. But always look up archive.org. You can find a lot of this stuff going on. So let's see. Good article from Spiked. Anyone can be a hate crime laws. Got this a little bit off of Patrick Wood's website. Actually, an article that he wrote that links to this technocracy study course. This technocracy study course was from Columbia or in New York in 1933. So you need to keep that in mind. 1933. And look at what it says. An outline of those elements of science and technology essential to an understanding of our social mechanism, an analysis of the price system, technocracy, social synthesis. So they wanted to control everything. They thought, we're scientists, we're smarter than politicians, we need to do that. And later in the article, it has a thing called the Continental Control. The Continental Director, as the name implies, is the chief executive of the entire social mechanism. On his immediate staff are the directors of the armed forces, the foreign relations, the continental research, and the social relations and area control. And one of the people that really bought into this was a guy named Zbigniew Brzezinski. I should put up my Brzezinski picture. But look at what one of these things is. It talks about what they want to accomplish. So present industrial shutdown, for instance, has relied entirely from a blocking of the flow line at the consumption end. And they said, well, how are we going to control this? And so here's what they want to do. Register on a continuous 24-hour period basis the total net conversion of energy, which would determine the availability of energy for continental plant construction and maintenance, on and on. Number two, by means of registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. This is from the 1930s. So they've been at this for a very, very long time. Number 4, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services, where produced and where used. Provide a specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. Does this sound like something that they're trying to actually implement now? Now they have the technology to be able to do it. That's that CIA article. Okay. The other thing that you're seeing, this is an article written, you can get this at Technocracy News, Digital Public Infrastructure for One Earth, One Family, and One Future. This was talked about the G20, I mentioned this. Big publication, Digital Public Infrastructure. What do you see? Sustainable Development Goals again. And they have the DPI project. So this is what they're doing. They're calling it, to kind of get away from the bad association with what people have been complaining about, they're going to call it digital public infrastructure. Okay, a playbook, unbundling DPI. And it goes through and it talks about how we're going to do this. We're going to get, what's one of the things here? Digital identity, digital payments, content, consent-based data sharing. So that's what they want to do. And then here come the Sustainable Development Goals. How have countries progressed towards the SDGs by adopting the DPI approach? Well, here's one: no poverty, good health and well-being by introducing systems to enroll, schedule, and track doctor visits, medicines, and vaccinations to support existing health infrastructure. And then reduced inequalities, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's all over the place. And again, here's your digital identity and these type of things. And so they have this whole big playbook about how they're going to do this. So let me talk real briefly about. So Russia's been very busy recently. So when you watch what's happening, so here is Putin meeting with the new head of Wagner group, came to the Kremlin. He's going to be appointed head of the militias, the Wagner militias in Ukraine. Then you have Iran and Russia. We're talking about the Caucasus region because of what's going on in Nakomo, the Armenia, Azerbaijan conflict area. You had Putin meeting with the head of Libya, at least East Libya, Haftar, because Russia wants to expand their naval presence in the Mediterranean. So they had a meeting, Shoigu, Haftar, and Putin. And so this is Libya. They want to put ports there on the Mediterranean in addition to the port that they have at Tartus in Syria, which Russia controls. Putin's been meeting with, and people have been meeting with Baby Kim from North Korea. There's Shoigu with Baby Kim. Russia and Saudis have agreed to cuts. Have you noticed the price of gas and oil has gone up a little bit? Fortunately, we had that new sheet station over on 23, which is kind of holding things down in our area here. But out in California, they're paying like $6.60, $6.70, $7 a gallon for gas. With that sheet station over there, I'm getting it for like, what, $2.90 for regular? So if you haven't been over there, go over there. It's affecting all the gas stations in the area for at least a month or two. Here is, I believe his name's Karakov. He's the head of the Chechen militia. These were mortal enemies of Russia when his father was in charge, but then there's word that Putin bought him off to help control Chechnya because the Russians are concerned about the Southern Caucasus. Here's Shoigu meeting with, he went to a defense show in Iran and was shown around some of the technology that Iran has, that Iran is selling around the world to make money. We have the immigration problem. Don't even have time to go into that. You also have this the Iranians are just always pushing their defense capabilities. And the problem is it's hard to verify. So a lot of them might just be propaganda or other nonsense. But that's going on. I forgot to mention this earlier when I was talking about the agenda for the transgender agenda. This is the American Anthropology Association. They were going to have a session at their annual conference, and this just happened this week. The AAA and CASCA boards reached a decision to remove this session from the agenda. Let's talk about sex, baby. Why biological sex remains a necessary analytic category in anthropology from that program. The decision was based on an extensive consultation, was reached in the spirit of respect for our values in order to ensure the safety and dignity of all of our members, as well as the scientific integrity of the program. By the way, if you're defending the scientific integrity of a scientific program, you're lying. You're just a big old propagandist. The first ethical principle in AAA's principles of professional responsibility is to do no harm. The session was rejected because it relied on assumptions that run contrary to the settled science in our discipline, framed in ways that do harm to vulnerable members of our community. It commits one of the cardinal sins of scholarship. It assumes the truth of the proposition that it sets out to prove. These people are morons. They're worse. They are dystopian control freaks that want to do everything. This is a materials thing in Galilee to try to develop superconductors, which I don't know that they need all that, because one of the things that they're doing is the algorithms are growing exponentially effective. So even though the chips aren't necessarily keeping up, the algorithms that they use through artificial intelligence development are actually doing a better job than they did before. So if you like getting all those little notices about the things you've been talking about, thinking about, or whatever on Facebook, then you're going to love the world that's coming. Let's see, I'm going to skip over some of this. Oh, here's Niger. This is again Russia. Niger, Russian flag. South Sudan guy came to the Kremlin this week. Haftar from Libya came. They're reconstituting the Wagner influence in different areas. Niger, South Sudan, Central African Republic, they're developing it. So this is, I could talk about Ukraine for a long time, but I don't know that it's necessarily relevant to Bible prophecy other than that it's a big war. And here's Biden offering advanced missiles to Kyiv, which may escalate things. And there's a legitimate concern about nuclear war. Russia keeps talking about it. Ukraine keeps fighting back. Russia doesn't like that. I think they've used artificial intelligence. Here's a map. If you want to get this and other maps, there's a website called Live UA Map, liveuamap.com, I believe. And you can get, and they have all these different regions of the world that you can get. So Zelensky, he came to the United States. I don't think he made a lot of friends. I think support is waning. And then he goes back and he does this ridiculous thing. He says, well, I think that Marie Abramovich should be an ambassador for Ukraine. This lady is an artistic wacko. I mean, she's remember that I talked years ago about this thing called spirit cooking and that type of thing where they would like make up human bodies and then at a dinner they would eat the body. You probably suppressed it in your memory, but I did talk about it. And it's, so here's, so she's this artist that this was from the Telegraph. They have this big show about her and a biography and everything. She's big with the Hollywood and the elites. But look at, do you see the imagery though in the pictures of her, our show, what she's doing? So avoid her. I know that's pretty tough. Let's see, what do we got here? That's the Azerbaijan thing, I don't have time to talk about that today. This is an article. So Jerusalem Post, there's a lot of talk about the Saudi-Iranian or Saudi peace agreement with Israel. Everybody says everything's in place. It's coming together. What are they going to do with the Palestinians? Newsweek has a big article in its current issue called, did I say Newsweek? Newsweek has a big article in its current issue called The Death of the Palestinian Dream. Part of that is based on research that was done by the Israeli Defense and Security Forum. And you can go to, if you want a link to the PDF of the research, send me an email. I think it's John Haller or john.haller@fbchapel.com, and I'll try to get you that link. And we should have some links in the show notes today for a couple things that I may not get to. Here's another article, China's Global Leap, Quest for Genetic Data, Spurs Fears of DNA Arms Race. What they did was they went to, I think it was to Serbia, and they said, hey, we can help you with some things. All we want is all of your DNA data in return. What are they going to do with that? Well, you know what China's going to do with that. Front page, the Wall Street Journal, tech deployed in Ukraine fight is reshaping modern warfare. Here is a report. So this is Iran. They had a military parade the other day it was either to memorialize the beginning or end of the Iraq-Iran war back in the 1980s. And they're rolling out all of this military gear. And then what you'll see here in just a second is they're rolling out, they have what they claim are hypersonic missiles. And then this is supposedly the longest range drone in the world. It can stay in the air for 24 hours. Now, I don't know if it can happen or not. The other thing that they did, this was on the front page of the Tehran Times recently, they launched a satellite system, NOR-3, which has a lot of surveillance capabilities. They got it into orbit, and who knows what use they're going to be making of that. But that's their thing. Here's another video of them rolling out this missile as they take it out to the launch site. And then they launch it. Here's a graphic from one of the Iranian newspapers of what it looks like in orbit, surveilling things. And they do have a lot of capability. There's a lot of talk about the drones that Iran is making for Saudi Arabia, and Ukraine's been tearing them apart and finding that a lot of the materials come from European companies, European and Western companies. Now, whether they're selling them for that purpose, I don't know. Seth Frantzman at the Jerusalem Post said, it is clear that Iran's drone program is now getting more time in the spotlight from the US and Europe. The problem the West faces in going after the drone program is that Iran is an expert at setting up shell companies and exploiting loopholes to avoid sanctions. I wonder if somebody else in the United States sets up shell companies to avoid scrutiny. So, and the other thing they have, this is a Iranian drone, the one that they've been using in Russia. But the interesting thing about this drone is it doesn't have a propeller anymore. It has a jet engine. Now, I'm not sure that this is a valid thing, because that looks like it's falling by gravity. But see, this is the problem with the Iranian systems. You can't tell whether they're real or not until they use them. But I don't think it's beyond their capability to develop a jet engine for something like that. But you don't see the heat signature coming from the engine as it falls into the target. But they're developing a lot of drones. And they've stolen some of our technology. So I got... Okay, so I'm going to skip over a couple things. If I have time, I'll do a midweek update. Here's a little clip of Netanyahu speaking at the UN I didn't get a chance to play this last week. This is just a couple minutes. Listen to what he says in his speech about Iran.
Now, you know, ladies and gentlemen, you know there's a fly in this ointment, because rest assured, the fanatics ruling Iran will do everything they can to thousands of Iran's brave citizens. Iran's drones and missile program threaten Israel and our Arab neighbors, and Iran's drones have brought and bring death and destruction to innocent people in the Ukraine. Yet the regime's aggression is largely met by indifference in the international community. 8 years ago, the Western powers promised that if Iran violated the nuclear deal, the sanctions would be snapped back. Well, Iran is violating the deal, but the sanctions have not been snapped back. To stop Iran's nuclear ambitions, this policy must change. Sanctions must be snapped back. And above all, Iran must face a credible nuclear threat. As long as I'm Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons.
Okay, so what happened was when he said that, Iran went crazy. He's threatening us with nuclear war. You can't threaten us with nuclear war. That's against UN policy, blah, 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 okay? You can't do something like that. So then the Tehran Times, so Israel came out and said, well, the text of his transcript, the text of his speech actually said a credible military threat, not a credible nuclear threat. So then Tehran took that and said, oh, he's got dementia. Okay, so you see how the Iranian mind works. And Israel and Netanyahu, in that part of the speech where he was doing the map and he showed Israel, all the Palestinians and others went crazy. He's wiped out the Palestinian enclaves, even though they don't recognize Israel at all anyway in the imagery that they use. But of course, they're going to use it against Netanyahu. And he talked about this Middle East energy and corridor that they're developing. Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia was big on that. Now, one more thing, and I'll I don't have one more thing. I have 10 more things, but I'll limit it to one. So this is Caroline Glick, but Caroline's not the only one that wrote about it this week. Her column, What Iran's Penetration of Washington Means. This came out in a thing called Semaphore publication. There were this is Semaphore, Inside Iran's Influence Operation. The Atlantic Magazine wrote about it in an extensive article. Caroline Glick wrote about it. Seth Frantzman of the Jerusalem Post wrote about it. Caroline's article is JNS. And there's also a website, Twitter, that opposes the Iranian regime called Iran International. And they wrote a very extensive article. Here's what happened. Iran sent pro-Iranian people and sprinkled, they said years ago they were going to influence the U.S. and the way the U.S. dealt with Iran. And so they put people in place in different policy centers. They put them in there, the International Crisis Group and other places. And what happened was 3 aides of a guy named Robert Malley, and I won't try to get their names. Here's a picture of them on the right. And you can go to Twitter, look up their names, look at some of the things they said. They're pro-Iranian. And so what Iran International, Atlantic, Semaphore, Caroline Glick, Seth Frantzman, they said, listen, Iran was very clever in this operation to spread pro-Iranian influence throughout the U.S. and its government. This one lady, Ariana Tabatabai, or whatever her name is, she's actually an assistant policy chief at the Pentagon right now. Robert Malley, he's been, I think, fired. His security clearance was revoked. He's under the investigation of the FBI, and he was big in the Obama administration and then in the Biden administration on the Iranian issue, and all of a sudden he's gone. But these other people stay behind, either in the government or in these think tanks that have a big influence on U.S. policy. So here's Seth Fransman's article, and title tells it all. Iran gets more bang for its buck in influence ops. Here's what he says. Recent revelations in the U.S. that Iranian foreign ministry officials initiated a quiet effort to bolster Tehran's image and positions on global security issues, particularly its nuclear program, by building ties with a network of influential overseas academics and researchers, have caused controversy about how the Iran deal was sold to the public and policymakers. In an article at the news site Semaphore by Jay Solomon called Inside Iran's Influence Operation. Now, the State Department and others in the Biden administration have come out and said, well, that was back in 2014, 2015. They're still around. That's the point. You haven't fired them. You haven't got rid of them. You're following their policy, and they're pro-Iranian. Remember, some people think that maybe it's not Obama who's running things, it's Valerie Jarrett. And she's pro-Iranian on steroids. So this is very concerning. Now, here's one thing that this comes from memory. And so here was a speech that was done in this big square in Iran. Iranian Armed Forces Chief of Staff General Mohammad Bagheri delivered a speech while soldiers stand in formation over this surface, which is blazoned with this statement that Israel should be erased. So that's from memory, and you can get that. And apparently it said Israel must be erased from, but I don't know that it makes that much difference because they want Israel to be erased, and that's what they talk about all the time. So I will talk a little bit more in another update about, I think, some of the implications coming out of the UN meetings this past week. Tehran is just all over everything. They've got more missiles. This is the General Soleimani missiles, ballistic missiles. They came out and said, oh, I'll finish with this. U.S. admits Iran's not seeking nukes. So we have this new Department of Defense thing, strategy for countering weapons of mass destruction. And it says it right here. So the Iran, they cherry pick things out of the article. It is assessed that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapons program at this time, but has the capacity to produce enough fissile material for a nuclear device in less than 2 weeks. Oh, so don't worry about it. Enjoy the last 2 weeks of your life. It'll be wonderful before we erase you. I'll make 2 recommendations. I'm not going to play it. This is Avi Abelo. You can go to Rumble. He has 2 recent videos up under Pulse of Israel. One from about a week ago that he did with Mordecai Kedar that talks about the Saudi-Israel peace deal. So go to rumble.com, type in Avi Abelo, A-V-I-A-B-E-L-O-W. Like, support his channel. I think he does a great job. Really nice guy. And then just published this morning, I think he did an interview with Caroline Glick, who I think does a very good job. I know people disagree with her, but believe me, if you ever look at her Twitter feed and she makes a statement and the vitriol that comes her way is just, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So they talk about judicial reform and some of the things that are going on with Netanyahu. So you can see that, particularly the first 30 minutes or so of that, I think is very informative about this. I was going to play about a 10-minute clip, but we are over time. So crazy world. A lot of things happening, Middle East. I think so much of this relates to Bible prophecy. Mark of the beast technology, control, rumors of war, all of the birth pangs. I think all of these things are in play right now. So get your hearts prepared spiritually and also prepare yourself physically, because I think that we have some potentially rough days ahead. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for your word. We pray that you will bless us this week, give us wisdom, and infuse us with your Holy Spirit so that we can act wisely in these days and always use and look for opportunities to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.